The topic I've been tasked to answer today is non-biblical evidence for Christianity. And it's a really important topic, and there's a couple questions I'm going to answer today. Is there evidence outside of the Bible for the claims of Christianity and the historicity of Jesus? And number two, is there reliable evidence that a reasonable person could read and conclude that the most important parts of Christianity are plausible? And of course, my answer to both of those is yes. But before I dive into some of the historical examples and evidence, I just want to address something right off the bat. I know some of you listening right now are not Christians. You're not a follower of Jesus. And first, I just want to commend you for checking out this video and having the humility to listen to something that you might disagree with or push back against. And if you're non-Christian, chances are you probably asked Christians before in your life, hey, why do you believe in Jesus? Or what evidence do you have to support your faith? And you probably heard some version of these answers before. Well, I just have faith, or I just believe, or the Bible tells me so. And that may be good enough for them, but that's not good enough for you because you want evidence that actually the claims of Jesus have some proof, some historical evidence. And so on behalf of all Christians who've ever said those types of things and just left it at that, I want to say I'm sorry. And there are really good answers, and there are really good pieces of evidence that we can point to and that I'm going to talk about today, just a handful of them. Now, when it comes to historical evidence, the three sources I'm going to cite right here in just a moment are what's called secondary sources. A secondary source is not an eyewitness account, but it's somebody who took an eyewitness account. Either somebody had a conversation with them or they read something that a primary source wrote. And a primary source is an eyewitness, right? So I'm going to give you three secondary sources. And there's dozens of them, by the way, that were written between about 90 AD and 150 AD that all talk about Christianity. They talk about Jesus and the claims of Christ. And listen, I cannot give you definitive 100% proof that the claims of Jesus are true by citing secondary sources. Nobody could do that by citing old historical texts. However, I do think there's strong evidence here, and I'm going to show you three sources that we're going to dive into right now. The first one is a man named Tacitus. He was a Roman historian. He lived from 55 to 120 AD, and he's widely considered the greatest Roman historian of his time. And he wrote a book called Annals around 100 AD. And in chapter 15-44, he says this. He said, consequently, to get rid of their abominations, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And the most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of evil, but even in Rome. So from that quote, from Tacitus's account, it verifies the existence of a historical Jesus, that he was crucified, and that Christianity spread beyond his death to such a degree that Nero, the Roman emperor at the time, wanted to persecute Christians, and he actually burned the city of Jerusalem and the temple to the ground in 70 AD. That's one source, a Roman historian. The second source, Josephus. He's a Jewish historian. He lived about 37 AD to 97 AD, and he became the court historian for the Emperor Vespasian. And he wrote a historical quote in his book Antiquities that he wrote about 90 AD. And here's a quote from Antiquities chapter 18, verse 3. He says this, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it's lawful to call him a man, for he was one who wrought surprising feats. He was the Christ. He appeared to them alive again on the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him." So that's his quote. And Josephus' account here is a Jewish historian who didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus, reported that Jesus existed as a historical man, that he performed miracles, that he was crucified, that he resurrected from the dead, and he fulfilled a lot of Old Testament prophecies. And then there's a third source that I want to cite here to prove some of the claims of Christianity. It's the Jewish text, the Talmud. And the Talmud is made up of the Mishnah and the Gemara. It's a sacred text for Jews, and it was written between 70 and 200 AD. And the Babylonian Talmud quotes this in volume 3, page 281. On the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned, because he's practiced sorcery and enticed Israel into apostasy. And anyone who can say anything in his favor, let him come forward and plead on his behalf." But since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of the Passover. Of course, Yeshu is Hebrew, Yeshua or Yehoshua, meaning Yahweh saves or Yahweh delivers. It's the name of Jesus. And so even the Jewish text, the Talmud, references Jesus as a historical person who was crucified on the eve of the Passover. And of course, we're not going to mention the divinity of Jesus because Jews did not believe that Jesus was God in the flesh. And I could go on and on and on and cite dozens of these examples by non-Christians who make historical claims for Jesus and for Christianity. But all of these texts, a Roman historian, a Jewish historian, a Jewish religious text from 90 to 150 AD, all say similar things about what the Bible talks about and claims that Christians have made for thousands of years. And that's just non-Christian sources, and there's dozens of them. There's also a lot of Christian sources that I don't have time to dive into and read to you today, but there's 3 secondary sources that wrote between 90 and 150 AD that I want you to check out. I want you to read. They are Clement of Rome, Ignatius, and Justin Martyr. 3 really cool names you can't forget. Clement of Rome, Ignatius, and Justin Martyr. They all talk about the divinity of Jesus, the crucifixion, and the resurrection from the dead. Now listen, I cannot prove beyond the shadow of a doubt the claims of Jesus or Christianity based on secondary sources from 90 to 150 AD. But what we can do is make a very compelling argument and a very compelling case that there's a lot of evidence out there that point to the claims of Jesus, the claims of the Bible, and the claims of the early church. Now, I don't have time to go into this either, but another great piece of evidence that exists to demonstrate the truth of Christianity in the Bible is archaeology. And there's a great book. It's called Excavating the Evidence for Jesus. It's by Titus Kennedy. And it's like all good books, it's got pictures. But it talks about a lot of the evidence around coins, inscriptions, different excavation sites, different books they found that corroborate a lot of what's said in the Bible and backs up a lot of the truths that Jesus claimed. And so there is a lot of evidence out there, my friends. Most of it is kind of boring and you kind of got to dig for it, but there's a lot of it out there. And so my hope is that this small talk was helpful to you, gave you some starting points to dive into and dig into. And hey, my friends, if you're a follower of Jesus, the next time somebody asks you, hey, is there evidence for your faith in Jesus? Say yes, and say it exists beyond just the Bible told me so, because there's a lot of really good evidence out there that backs up the claims of Jesus and the claims of Christianity. All you got to do is dig in, find it. And so, my friends, as you search, happy reading.